Hey guys, this is a lecture for Chapter 5 on evolution of biodiversity. Let's jump right into this. This first slide is all about diversity, okay? Ecosystem diversity is the variety of ecosystems in a given region. If you look at picture A, you can see numerous ecosystems such as an ocean, a forest type ecosystem, and what looks to be a desert on the right. Species diversity is the variety of species in an ecosystem. If you look at picture B, you can see a bunch of different animals such as squirrels, bears, and there's a bird there. And it's estimated that there's about 10 million different species on Earth today. Finally, on the smallest level is genetic diversity. Genetic diversity is the variety of genes within a species. If you look at picture C, you can see a species of squirrel, which all have different genes. When determining the diversity of an ecosystem, it is important to determine the number of species present. Okay, so for this first term, species richness is the number of species in a particular area, whereas species evenness is the measure of whether an ecosystem is dominated by one species or spread out evenly by a species. If you look at the picture on this slide, community 1 has a high species evenness because the ecosystem is evenly split in terms of the species. Okay, it's 25%, 25%, 25%, and 25%. Okay, community 2 is a little less even in terms of species because species A at 70% dominates the ecosystem over species B, C, and D, which are each 10%. Okay, as we jump more into biodiversity, there are a few terms we need to cover to get a better understanding of what this is. The most general term is just evolution in general, I guess, which is a change in the genetic composition of a population over time. This could be, and usually is, to find better traits to adapt to their environment or to survive the longest to be able to reproduce eventually. And then there are two subsections of that. Microevolution is evolution on a smaller scale, and it's usually evolution that humans can view in their lifetime. A really good example of this is bacteria. Bacteria reproduce super quickly, so we can normally see the changes if they are evolving. Macroevolution, on the other hand, is usually on a larger scale, and we usually can't see this in our lifetime, and we usually see this through a fossil record, or through the fossil record, and I'll go over that later in this video. And this is macroevolution is usually the evolution of a species that reproduces later in their lifespan and has a greater lifespan, such as humans. So obviously, humans is a good example of macroevolution if we were evolving, because we can't we can't view our own evolution in our lifetime. A phylogeny is the branching patterns of evolutionary relationships. And I know that sounds like a lot of big words, but once you get a better understanding of it, it isn't that hard to get a hold of or get a grasp of. The picture shows a phylogenetic tree where you have a common ancestor, which you can see at the bottom. It says ancestor common to all descendants. And it evolves with the most primitive structure, which means the oldest evolving structure, being the notochord. As the species evolves, they develop key traits to help them survive better in the wild and eventually reproduce, and better in their environment. Body shape, behavior, and genetic similarity can all be used to determine how close or far two species are from each other in terms of evolution. For example, the chipmunk and the lizard are very closely related because they have the notochord of the vertebrae, the hinged jaw, 4 legs. The only difference is the lizard doesn't have mammary glands. And these phylogenetic trees make it really easy because they show evolution visually. So this next slide is all about creating genetic diversity. And to learn about this, we need to know about some more terms. So a gene is a physical location on a chromosome within each cell of an organism. Okay, and organisms are composed of cells, and each cell has a chromosome which contains genes. A genotype is the complete set of genes in an individual. A mutation is a change in genetic code. Okay, so genes contain genetic code, and when they're altered by a mutation, such as a deletion, which is removal of a codon, or duplication, which is making one more or two more, however more of a codon, the genetic code is mutated and it completely screws up the entire rest of the line, depending on what the mutation is, because there are other types of mutations. While most mutations are harmful, not all are harmful. Okay, some can actually be beneficial to the organism. Recombination is when chromosomes are duplicated and one piece of the chromosome breaks off and attaches to another chromosome. And finally, a phenotype is the actual set of traits expressed by an individual. For example, a fruit fly has a red-eyed phenotype, whereas it would have, let's say, if the letter for that trait was R and it was recessive, red eyes was recessive, it would have a RR genotype. And you can see another example of that with the fruit, or not with the fruit, with the pea plants in the bottom right corner. And the picture in the bottom right shows the difference between the phenotype and the genotype. And I mean, you should really already know the difference, but in case you don't know, phenotype is the actual description of the organism's trait, whereas the genotype is the homozygous / heterozygous letters that correspond to the phenotype. Yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory. This next slide is all about natural and artificial selection. Okay, natural selection is when the environment determines which individuals are most likely to survive and reproduce based on their traits. For example, if a species of moths have two different colors, black and white, and their habitat was normally on black surfaces, then the white moths would be weeded out by natural selection because their predators would be able to see them better and would eat them, so the trait would quickly be removed from the species. Whereas the black moths would have better camouflage from the predators. On the other hand, artificial selection is when humans choose which traits are desirable and breed for those certain traits. For example, if a certain herding trait in a dog species is desirable, they will breed with that dog instead of a dog that may have a trait for, let's say, attacking, if they would rather have herding as a desirable trait. And then they would get a dog that had good herding skills, and that would benefit them. GMOs, or genetically modified organisms, are a product of evolution by artificial selection when humans insert genes into other species of plants, animals, or microbes to get the results they want. Okay. GMOs can increase productivity, crop yield, or maybe other things that can benefit humans. The image on the right shows natural selection versus artificial selection. The wolf has undergone natural selection over numerous generations to be able to survive, grow, and reproduce most efficiently. However, the corgi below it is artificially selected by humans to be super duper cute and is also used for herding. This slide goes farther into Darwin's theory of natural selection. It shows characteristics of natural selection and the criteria for it to occur. As you can see, individuals must produce an excess of offspring, so certain individuals can actually be killed off and selected against. If there was no excess, there would be no competition, so there would be no natural selection. Also, the individuals must differ in traits, as if they didn't, there would be nothing special to select from. The characteristics of natural selection are not all offspring can survive, as some must be selected to be weeded out. Difference in traits can be passed on from parents to the offspring, and differences in traits are associated with differences in the ability to survive and reproduce. So this is the first part of diagram 5.10, and then the next couple slides go into the second and third part. But this first part shows two amphipods reproducing, which create offspring that differ in size. As you can see from the diagram, larger fish tend to eat the larger amphipods because they're larger, bigger food source. They give them protein, meaning the smaller ones tend to survive over the larger ones. This is the second part of diagram 5.10, and the parents are now a large amphipod and a small amphipod. They produce one large amphipod and three small ones, and due to predators and natural selection. The final part of figure 5.10 shows the parents as two small amphipods, which produce four small amphipods, none of which are eaten. As you can see, over time, large amphipods were easily eaten by the predators, therefore the smaller amphipods prevailed and the larger ones were weeded out via natural selection. This slide shows a diagram of artificial selection, beginning with the wolf as the common ancestor. Humans picked and chose certain desirable traits that fit their needs at that time, giving us the dog breeds we have today. And that could be herding, attack dogs, whatever. There are ways to evolve through random processes that aren't chosen by humans through artificial selection or through natural selection. The first is mutation, which occurs randomly and can cause species to randomly evolve and pass down mutated genes. And I already talked about mutations before, but this is just a recap. Gene flow is when individuals move from one population to another and alter the genetic composition of both populations. This could be through a pass, like through mountains, pass through mountains. A natural disaster could move some individuals to another population. Some way to move individuals from one population to another. Genetic drift is evolution of genetic composition of a population over time as a result of random mating. Okay, and that's the key part of that. For example, if a cardinal randomly mates with an oriole, that is genetic drift, creating a different breed. It's more likely to affect smaller populations. The bottleneck effect is a reduction in the amount of genetic diversity due to a reduction in the size of the population. This could be due to predators, natural disasters, etc. Whatever it is. It's just some reduction of the size of the population. Finally, the founder effect is a change in population descended from a small number of colonizing individuals. A good example of this is if a few birds move from island to island and reproduced with the new species of birds already on that island. They would be passing their traits from that island to another island. As you can see, here is a diagram of mutation. Basically, a mutated rat who somehow just his DNA was copied. It just didn't copy right, so he had a mutation, and the mutated rat reproduces with the other rats, passing on its mutated genes, causing more black rats to show up in the population. And you can see that on the right side. Okay, this is an example of gene flow. I didn't really like the example in your book. I didn't think it was very good. Gene flow, individuals somehow move from one population to another, however that be. Like I said, through a pass, and you can see that in the diagram, or natural disaster, whatever. Changing the genetic composition of both populations. In this example, 2 red dots, which are deer, you can compare that to deer in the bottom part, move from population 1 to population 2 through some form of transportation, whatever that be. As they were 2 different species, when the 2 red dots mated with the rest of the blue dots, they changed the genetic composition of population 1 and 2. This is an example of genetic drift. I didn't really like the example in your book once again. I didn't think it thoroughly explained it well enough, and I mean, this is a huge portion of your test, so you want to know this. And genetic drift is when the gene frequency of a population changes. Okay, so let's look at this example real quick, and let's say originally, out of a population of 10, only 5 rabbits of the population reproduced. Maybe the others died off, maybe they were caught in a trap, some reason that they couldn't reproduce. As those 5 brown rabbits reproduce, they change the gene frequency because there's going to be more and more brown rabbits because they're going to pass on their brown genes. Normally, if all individuals of a population reproduce, then the gene frequency stays the same. However, since only parts of the population reproduced, eventually the white rabbits were weeded out. And you can see that as you look down the example. This is an example of the bottleneck effect. If you look at the picture, you begin with a very large population, which majorly decreases due to some cause. Like I said, could be a natural disaster, disease, whatever. The small group of survivors may not include a specific trait. As you can see, all of the remaining individuals are either black or brown. There's no more white rats, which means that white trait is never going to be seen again. So that completely changes the evolution of that species, because if it was a small species and confined to that area, you know, that once that white trait is gone, so that white trait is gone, yeah. And then once those old rats, or once those remaining rats reproduce, they reproduce and give their traits to their offspring, and there's no white traits. This final random process of evolution is the founder effect, which is basically when a few individuals migrate to another island or part of land and could reproduce with some of the population that was already there, or reproduce by themselves. And they may lose that trait that they originally had. In this example, they lose the white trait again. The founder effect and bottleneck effect are very similar, except one occurs due to random migrating and the other occurs due to major decrease in population, respectively. As we look more into evolution, there are changes via natural selection through selective pressures. Okay, selective pressures determine whether organisms survive and reproduce or if they die off. Okay, in the picture you can see the giraffes with longer necks are able to reach the trees that they need to eat from with ease. They have no issue, they have no problem doing it. However, the giraffes with shorter necks either have a super hard time, or they can't even reach the tree at all, and basically they starve to death. Over time, this selective pressure causes natural selection to take the short neck gene out of their species. There are many adaptations for survival and reproduction that animals evolve over time. This is a chart of a couple examples of adaptation, such as escaping predation and finding food. I'm not really going to go far into this, but if you want, you can pause the video and look at it. Okay, this chart shows two different species, one of which is a little more vulnerable to environmental changes than the other. The vulture is more vulnerable because they have very narrow distribution, small population, etc. And you can see that list next to the vulture species right there. However, the fly is less vulnerable because their species has a wide distribution and a larger population, and so on and so forth. And you can read that list there too. The vulture can still survive if the environmental changes are slow. However, if it's a rapid change, like a giant, if they're living in one place, like I said, with a narrow distribution, and they're just living in one place and a natural disaster comes through, like a hurricane or whatever, and they can't adapt fast enough, they'll battle. That's extinction right there. Unlike the fly, who lives in multiple places around the world. Okay, taking a look at these two species, which species do you think will survive in a rapidly changing environment? I'll give you a few seconds to read over them and think about it. Okay, if you guessed the mouse, you'd be correct. The mouse has a wide distribution, so if the environment is only changing in certain areas, they could still survive easily, like no issues. If we look at a few more, they have a large population, so they'd be able to survive much easier, even if a lot of their population was wiped out. I also hope you enjoyed that beautiful drawing there in the corner. It's very nice. Speciation is the formation of new and distinct species through the course of evolution, and we'll view an image of that on the next slide so you can get a better understanding of that. However, for speciation to occur, there are a few prerequisites. Okay, the original population must separate into smaller populations, and those populations can't breed with each other. This could occur due to natural barriers such as rivers, or it could be any barrier really. It also doesn't even need to be a barrier. It could be an unfavored habitat where it just doesn't suit the needs of that part of the population. The other prerequisite is the two separate populations must be exposed to different selective pressures, which has to do with natural selection. And we'll see two examples of this afterwards. This is a very good example of speciation of foxes. I really like this example. It's a good example. A population of foxes split, and the two new subpopulations spread northward and southward due to the changes in environment, temperature, rainfall, etc. They evolve under natural selection to have these traits that allow them to live in the environment that they spread to. And you can read the list of adaptations they have real quick, but I'm not going to go too far into them. Another good example of speciation is the Galapagos finches, whose changes were observed by Charles Darwin. As you can see at the bottom of the web, all these finches on this chart come from a common ancestor, the South American finch. As this population of South American finches split and spread to different areas, they need to evolve different traits to adapt to their new environments. For example, if you look at the chart, the Geospiza fulginosa adapted in an environment that most likely had seeds as its main food source, as the new finch species needed to, or adapted a seed-crushing beak to eat with. This is Pangea, and this is basically what the Earth looked like 225 million years ago. And we're going to dive a little bit into tectonic plates, but as the tectonic plates shifted and moved, Pangea broke apart, and slowly the continents moved into the positions where they are today. This is a picture of all 14 tectonic plates. If you look at the picture, in Europe you can see a collision zone, which is when two continental plates come together to form mountains. In China you can see a clearly labeled subduction zone, which is when an oceanic plate slides under a continental plate. And finally, if you look in the Atlantic Ocean to the right of South America, you can see a transform fault, which is two plates sliding past each other. As we look into the movement of tectonic plates, there are three types of movement which I personally think they look like they sound. Collision zones are when two continental plates collide into each other, creating a mountain range. Subduction zones are where oceanic plates subduct or slide under a continental plate. And finally, a transform fault is where two plates slide past each other. And you can take a second to pause this video to look at these pictures, which I recommend because they are very helpful in remembering them. So we learned about speciation before, which was the creation of new species due to evolution. But there are certain types of speciation though. The first one is allopatric speciation, which is when new species are created through geographic or reproductive isolation. They are isolated and forced to adapt to either their geographic area or their reproductive situation. The next type of speciation is sympatric speciation, which is the evolution of one species into two species, where there's no geographic isolation. Okay, there can't be geographic isolation. This usually occurs through an increase in the number of sets of chromosomes, and you can see this occurring in these types of wheat in the picture. The pace of evolution can be shown by these graphs. Let me give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So if you look at the first graph on the y-axis is the rate of environmental change. If the environmental change is fast, as in there's very rapid change, then there's less evolution. This makes sense because there's less time for the species to be able to evolve if the environment is changing so quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but you can feel free to pause the video and take a look at these if you'd like, which I highly recommend once again. Okay, so all species have something called a range of tolerance, which is basically the limit of abiotic conditions that they can tolerate. So basically, if they die in that environment, it isn't in their range of tolerance. A good example would probably be a giraffe in Antarctica. The giraffe would quickly freeze to death, so Antarctica's environment is definitely not within the giraffe's range of tolerance. The fundamental niche is the ideal conditions for a species, where they can not only survive but also grow and reproduce. So we know about fundamental niches, however there is also realized niches. And a realized niche is the abiotic conditions and biotic conditions under which a species lives. This can determine geographic location and species distribution across the globe. The realized niche is a smaller area, usually the absolute best area for the species to live, which can be seen by the graph below. So this graph shows the fundamental niche for temperature for a certain species. The entire graph as a whole is the species' range of tolerance, but that part highlighted in orange is their fundamental niche. Okay, all species have their own fundamental niches in terms of temperature of their environment. In this case, this unknown species prefers very average temperatures. If their environment is within these temperatures, then they will be able to survive, grow, and reproduce. If they are one step outwards of that temperature range, they can really only survive and grow, and if they're outside of that, they can really only just survive. The temperatures usually need to become pretty extreme in order to reach these outside survival only categories. So there are two ways to classify species in terms of their niches. A niche generalist usually lives under a wide range of conditions and is able to adapt under extensive changing conditions because they usually have alternate habitats and alternate food sources. And you can see that in the meadow spittlebug on the left. A niche specialist is a species that only lives in specific habitats and really won't be able to handle many changing conditions. A good way to remember this, in my opinion, is someone who specializes in something is usually confined to one field of study, and a niche specialist is confined to certain areas. The way we know about evolution and how it exists as a whole is due to fossils, actually. When animals die, they leave behind a skeleton, which can be dug up and compared to that of current day animals or other animals to see if they have similar traits. Fossilization takes a lot of years, though, so we can only compare our current species with really old organisms. We know about adaptations of species due to relative dating of rocks. When rocks are found to be layered on top of each other, they are clearly from different times, obviously. The newer layers being towards the surface and the older layers being towards the bottom. However, we can figure out how and if species adapted to these different rock layers by examining them through relative dating. Over the period of time that life has existed on Earth, all life, not just humans, there's been 5 mass extinctions, and you can see those approximate time areas on the graph. Today's scientists believe that we are actually in our 6th mass extinction. Okay, so there were 5 before, and we scientists believe that we are starting the 6th. They believe the extinction rates vary from about 2% to 25% by 2020. That's soon. That's a lot of dead animals. The real thing to recognize about the 6th mass extinction, though, is in contrast to the previous 5 mass extinctions, Scientists can agree that this mass extinction is the first one actually caused by humans, because in the other 5, humans weren't on Earth. Biological diversity is the number, variety, and variability of Earth's organisms. This type of diversity consists of 3 components. Genetic diversity, which you can see on the right, which is in the species of corn. Species richness, and ecosystem diversity. By now we've covered all 3 of those terms, so if you don't know what those mean, you may want to look back over them, because you're going to need to know them. Organisms are very important to not only the ecosystem, but they also contribute to human life as well. They can provide food, clothing, shelter, pollination of crops, antibiotics, medicines, and biological processes such as nitrogen fixation. So, all organisms are related not only to each other, but they are all related to the physical environment. All organisms provide ecosystem services, such as they provide clean air, clean water, fertile soil, etc. If humans or other means remove these species from a community, then we will have less ecosystem services, which means less clean air, less clean water, less fertile soil, and that's no fun for anyone. So modern day scientists have come up with ways to use genetics in our favor. Genetic engineering is the incorporation of genes from one organism into a completely different species. So basically taking a part of a genetic code from one organism and putting it into another. Genetic engineering can provide humans with new vaccines, more productive farm animals, plants and crops with desired traits, etc. It depends on genetic diversity from which it obtains genes, as they cannot, quote-unquote, create genes. It is very important to protect this diversity. The genetics of these organisms allow them to have certain advantages to humans, like I said, and these organisms can often be very important to the pharmaceutical industry as well. For example, the rosy periwinkle, which you can see to the right, can produce chemicals effective against certain types of cancer. The aquatic sponge produces a derivative for AZT, which is a drug used to treat AIDS. Organisms can provide agricultural and industrial importance to humans as well. Many species can be eaten by humans and or can increase crop yield and efficiency. Many organisms also have industrial importance as well, as they can create and provide things such as oils and lubricants, perfumes, dyes, paper, and even some poisons, depending on the species. Our Earth's biological diversity is disappearing very quickly. Endangered species are species that may become extinct in the very near future due to certain threats if humans don't take action. Threatened species is a species whose population has declined so dangerously low that they also may be at risk for extinction. Some characteristics of endangered species are extremely small range over one small area. Another is they may require a large territory to live, or they may even live on an island. They may have very low reproductive success and therefore have very low reproductive rates. They have a small population size and may require humans to step in and have specialized breeding areas or feeding areas. A good example of an endangered species is the California condor. The condor is a scavenger bird that requires a very large undisturbed territory, which is very hard to come by these days. In 1983, the species dropped to 22 birds, almost making the species extinct. From 1987 to 1992, they were no longer found in nature, but only in zoos. And then in 1992, they were reintroduced back into nature, and today there are currently over 200 condors in the world, so it's slowly getting better. Declining biological diversity is a big issue, but where is it the most serious? While it is a concern throughout most of the entire United States and most of the world, it is the most serious in Hawaii with 63% of the species at risk, and California with 29% of the species at risk. And those are pretty big numbers. In a lot of global tropical rainforests, such as South and Central America, there are big issues with declining biological diversity, especially in the Amazon. This map shows the hotspots where most of the declining biodiversity is occurring. As you can see in South America, the biggest issue is where the tropical rainforests are, such as, like I said before, the Amazon rainforests. There are many causes of declining biological diversity, but a lot of them are found to be human-based. For example, some indirect causes such as human population increase or increased economic activity usually lead to direct causes, such as land use change and overexploitation. A good example of this is, let's say the human population increases in an area, which is originally an indirect cause. Then more humans will need more land, removing areas for habitats to be. And all of these causes listed over here lead to declining biological diversity. Alright, so that is the end of this lesson. We are going to have a few review questions. So yeah, this is going to be a review for some of the stuff we went over in the video, and a review of some information that actually may be on the test. I will reveal the answer, but be sure to pause the video and try to guess the answer first before I reveal it, because the more you study, the better you'll do on the test. Okay, let's begin with question 1. So, a certain species of giraffe has a population with varying lengths of neck. Some are short, some are long. The environment they live in only allows for very tall trees, therefore the giraffes with the short necks cannot eat from the trees. The short-necked giraffes quickly die off, and the short-neck trait is removed from the species. Okay, so what is this describing? Is it A, artificial selection, B, bottleneck effect, C, natural selection, or D, mutation? I'll give you a few seconds to pause the video and think about this one. Okay, if you chose C, natural selection, you'd be correct. On to question 2. Genetic drift is most likely to occur in A, small population, B, large population, C, rapidly changing population, or D, a slow changing population. And I'll give you a few seconds to think about this one as well. If you said A, small population, you'd be correct. And now for the final review question, question 3. Which of the following can organisms provide for humans? And your choices are 1 or I, ecosystem services, II, medical advances, and III, industrial advances. Is it A, just I? Is it B, just II? Or is it C, just III? Is it D, I, and I? Or is it E, I, and I? I will give you a few seconds to think about this one. If you said E, I, and I, you'd be correct. That's the end of the review, and that's the end of this video. I hope this video was helpful for you all, and be sure to study for the test. Good luck.